Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the IDRiM Podcast. Today, we're going to finish our recap of GADRI 2025 with the local host, John van der Lindt. John is the Harold H. Short Endowment Chair Professor in the Civil and Environment Engineering at Colorado State University and co-director of NIST-funded Center of Excellence for Risk-Based Community Resilience and Planning. And John, of course, was our local host for GADRI 2025. So welcome, John.
Yeah, thank you, Ashley. A pleasure to be here.
So let's just get started. And this year's summit was kind of unique because it was held in Fort Collins, Colorado. But most important milestone was this was the first GADRI summit to be held in person outside of Japan. How does it feel to be the first host and institution to hold this feat?
Well, I should first say that I love going to Kyoto. I love Japan. I've been there maybe 40 times over my lifetime, and so definitely look forward to going to Japan more and more. I think back when I served on the board of directors for GADRI, I made this suggestion just because having been to 3 or 4 of them in a row in Kyoto, but yet always talking about the global summit, it felt like it was something that someone should bring up. So I brought it up, and of course, as I mentioned in my opening remarks here in Colorado a few weeks ago, when you suggest something, you better be ready to deliver. So we were happy to host it, and just honored to be the first, and I hope everybody feels like it went as well as I thought it did.
It's a bit like the World Series in baseball always being held in America. So, so the theme you chose was convergence, convergent disaster research and engagement, stakeholder engagement for resilience. What does that actually mean in practice?
Yeah, so in practice, it's 2 things. The converging disaster research is taking not just one approach to something, but bringing in things like experimental work, field studies, numerical modeling, analytical modeling, bringing all these things together, but then also bringing together social scientists, urban and other planners, economists, engineers, all scientists, bringing them all together. And then the stakeholder engagement portion is then really that co-production, bringing the stakeholders in, the people that are actually going to be affected by the change that this research brings, and bringing them into the mix as early as possible, if not right at the beginning.
Yeah, and actually, here in the UK, it's very much the social scientists and the physical scientists do not mix still, and so that's why when I seen the theme, that's why I was thinking you were going for, but trying to mix up, and actually trying to get this interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity, because not many countries seem to do it still. I think Japan's kind of one of the only ones I know who really do nail into this.
Yeah, and I think it's a challenge mainly, and I'd say even in Japan, I mean, it's really all countries have this challenge, and it's because of the way the academic model is set up, from 400 plus years ago in some countries, and Harvard, things like that, from the very beginning, and they're set up, as professors, we're each tenured in a department, and that department has this one or perhaps several, a couple of sub-disciplines, and that's what you earn your degree in going through school, and so then you then educate students in that, and so you have to be able to cross over and send students to other departments, send students to other colleges to not just take classes, but to actually engage, and that's really the first step. And so I think we're well on our way. In the U.S., I think Japan's doing a great job. I think it's something it can't be forced. It has to be bottom up. But the upper administration could help enable it if they so choose.
Yeah. So Coming back to, the organization of GADRI Summit this year, it was also a very special year because it was the 10th anniversary. So how did you manage to woven in the celebration of 10 years into hosting the first, summit outside of Japan?
Yeah, so that was it was the first day, so that actually occurred on the Sunday before the meeting, but it was a full day event. I think we started at I believe it was like 10 to 5 o'clock, and it was its own program with with our people that had served on the board of directors previously. Our chair of the board, Andrew, giving a talk, sort of, how setting the stage, and then going into the current, current chair of the board of directors, and so sort of walking our way through time, and so it was a little bit less technical and more, and then talking about the challenges, being more than halfway, through with. GADRI's support of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, and where it stands, and the challenges too, because setting up something for a decade, 2 decades, 15 years is we don't know the political climate, we don't know what's going to happen in the future, and so we're basing that timeline on present day when we do that almost 10 years ago or 10 years ago.
Yeah. So what I noticed as well is that when you talked about the theme, we talked about the theme, you also had 3 sub themes, it felt like: conveyance, engagement, and fundamental research. And that helped to shape the agenda. Why was it those 3 themes in particular you picked?
Yeah, and so interestingly, when we first drafted it, we had 4, but felt like that was a lot, because even 3 was quite a bit of information flowing, quite a bit of parallel sessions, things like that, and so it was mainly the topic itself: converging disaster research and stakeholder engagement for resilience, sort of requires almost to talk specifically about defining convergence research for those that it's new to, and then going in, showing examples, and then talking about gaps. And then the engagement itself, of course, is that stakeholder engagement part. So those two really were sort of main, but then the fundamental research part, recognizing that without the fundamental research, none of the other things exist. And so that it has its place in research, and even in practice. There's a need for implementing fundamentals and things. And so that to me, that one should always be a thread that goes through, because that's sort of the basis of everything.
Yeah. And when we talk about engagement, are we talking about, and we talk about, you said stakeholder engagement, are we talking about just about researchers and practitioners? Or are we talking about right down to the community level?
It's everyone. It's policymakers, researchers, bringing in policymakers, bringing in industry, can be different levels of government, all the way down to individuals that might have interest. And so a stakeholder is really anyone that's affected.
Yeah. So let's set the scene here. So you had 3 days of conferences, and there'll be a few who have not attended who'll be listening to this. What was the vibe in the room? Was it very formal or lively, very collaborative? What would you say was actually the sense of the room?
Yeah, so my feeling was it was just a relaxed vibe. I mean, people that knew each other, giving hugs hello after not seeing each other for a year or two, and then people giving people hugs goodbye at the end that they hadn't known before the meeting. So just going out for dinners, engaging at lunch. We had a new approach to lunch, and that we had something we called lunch with the keynote speakers. And so some of the junior researchers and others that wanted to talk to them could go into a room, with 5 or 6 people and chat with them that day. at lunchtime. It kept some of the keynote speakers sort of busy, and but the feedback was that they enjoyed it. So the vibe was positive, relaxed. I think with just enough jokes to keep life as light as it should be at times, but underscored by fully understanding that how imperative the subject matter is. So when things got serious during a discussion, they never were heated, but they were serious about a gap or a flaw in the methodology or things, not with an individual, but with the approach to government or something like that. And so it was really, to me, a perfect mix. But yeah, I love the vibe myself. Great word.
Yeah, and I heard I think the best the story I heard about the vibe was on the closing ceremony, when you had the reception. And my boss is Andrew Collins, and everyone in the band playing Happy Birthday and singing along. That was the best bit I heard.
Yeah. I was local 3-piece jazz band, and it was just the right volume in the corner so that people could still talk. And it was great. And then we did lots of toasts at all the events and things Japanese style with kanpai. So it was perfect.
Yeah, it sounds absolutely fantastic. What were the memorable side conversations or hallmark moments that really stood out during this summit?
Yeah, so of course I only know my own side conversations, but I would say I think to me I really enjoyed going. We went in small groups. We had events for 3 of the 4 evenings, but then on the Tuesday evening, the second day of the summit itself, we just provided a van to take people to downtown Fort Collins, which is called Old Town. And I enjoyed going out to a brewery and hanging out with a group of about I think it was about 10 of us, and that was just hearing about more about the United Nations and things from the Kyoto representative, and just the challenges that everyone's facing individually, but not in a bad way. Of course, there are challenges, maybe not always the best word, but maybe thinking of some of the challenges. Okay, how do we turn that into an opportunity? So it was just nice to connect with people. Sometimes you'd be walking through the hall and to the men's room or somewhere to another room, and 3-4 stops to talk with people on the way and almost miss a session. So
yeah, and I've attended quite a few of these GADRI summits, and it's always like that, where you try to get somewhere and you're literally talking to someone and someone else, and it's fantastic. So the other thing that I pulled out with Hero at the beginning before the summit even started was this season needs networking sessions. How did that work in practice?
It seemed to work pretty well. It felt a little bit. I think it felt a little bit like I noticed a lot of the posters were up, and it felt like we had put them up at the beginning and they stayed up the whole time, and so that was the time that was specifically aimed at people focusing and going, and people really engaged. I mean, there were 2, 3, sometimes 4 people around one poster while somebody was talking about their research, and so it seemed to work. In a way, it could have gone on for probably more hours even so, but we had to cut it off and get to the next session, which is usually how it works.
Yeah. So now I want to focus on the main program, and in particular around the plenaries. So as we mentioned, there are 3 main themes, and let's focus on each of them. So the first one was about convergence. So you had 3 speakers, Terry McAllister, Kit Matsumoto, and yourself. So what were the general themes and ideas that were coming out of this session?
Yeah, so it was really on So of course I know them both very well. Terry McAllister at NIST, she was talking about the resilience research that NIST has put forward, and of course our center was funded by NIST, and so for the last almost 11 years now, and so explaining how NIST goes about engaging with communities, how they've done that, how they've integrated and worked with our center that they funded, but it was a cooperative agreement, so we worked closely with them for the last decade, and so she went through that, and then Kid, of course, he runs this. He's the CEO and founder of a large global, Miyamoto International, large corporation that goes in and helps after disasters, and then they help with the rebuild. They're even working in the fires in Los Angeles right now, but he's been in Haiti. I think he talked about a couple of different countries, and it was really fascinating to see their methods and how they go through and actually train the locals to help. So they're really participating in that. Bringing in a way, indigenous peoples or at least the locals, depending on the country, to help with the rebuild, and not so much just come in like a Robin Hood and say, hey, here we are, but actually engaging with them and getting them to do that themselves, but giving them the tools and the methods and the techniques that they need. And then mine was primarily on the last 10 years of the center and the computational environment that we developed in collaboration with NIST called NCORE. And the focus of that is to model whole communities and interdisciplinary models of these interacting communities to then look at changes in policy and see how that affects, how numerically how that would affect the recovery and the resilience. And so it's really about measurement science, measuring resilience.
Which is always difficult to do when it's resilience, because it's I always say resilience is very qualitative, not quantitative science. So
no, you're absolutely right. Actually, I mean, that's really what we were tasked with a decade ago. And so, spent $40 million trying to figure out how to measure it. And, we feel like we've got a good handle on it. But there's always going to be something subjective in it because it's so community specific.
So now moving on to the second plenary sessions. This was on day 2. And this was very much about, engagement, partnerships, communication, and resultant policy. So you had 4 keynotes on this one. One was online. So I'm going to get the names wrong here. So Professor Lang, as I say, Laurie Peak, a dear friend of mine, Virginia Murray, and Kosha Metra. So what was the key takeaways from those presentations?
Yeah, so those, those. I mean, every plenary, every presentation that I had the opportunity to see was fantastic in my view. But these focused on a lot of, as the title implies, the partnerships and the engagement opportunities. And so Professor Young's was primarily just a review of their center and how they've been engaging with the community, and then Laurie Peaks, she talked a lot about participatory convergence, and so that's really slightly different in the sense that you're not just engaging the stakeholders, but they're actually participating in the research. And so that's even, maybe one step beyond, and it requires, careful planning, figuring this out. Sometimes they may be participating because they have a stake, stakeholders, they have a stake in the outcome, or they may even be, part-time employees, things like that. And so she talked about that through, her reducing risk and doing that. And then Virginia Murray talked about the information profiles update for the United Nations DRR, and really just went through the whole went through how they were updating, and then Kishore Mehta, who I've known for many decades, Lori as well. Kishore talked about a new program, which was a university industry cooperative center funded by the National Science Foundation in the U.S. And those are, when I say funded, they don't give a lot of money. They want you to go out and bring in money from industry, but that's the idea. So they just provide a catalyst funding, if you will. And he talked about the success of that as at Texas Tech University and through their wind engineering center. And so overall, just a great examples of, each one was a great example of a partnership or an engagement type.
Yep. So then we have a final plenary session, which happened later that day. And this was very much about the fundamental research. So this, again, had 4 different speakers, Professor Peter Sammons, Dr. Yuki Matsuka, Grace Yang, and Enrique Guevara. So what was the main takeaways from that plenary session?
Yeah, so this one I actually was I recall I had something urgent for so I only got to participate in this one and hear a couple of these, but primarily talking about the research itself. I would say I think I came in about halfway through keynote 8, which was Professor Matsuoka, or Doctor, excuse me, Yuki, and talking about the outcome of the 8th session of the Global Platform for Disaster Risk Reduction. And so she went through and effectively provided a summary, and then I did hear Grace Yan. Grace Yan talked about just the tornado research and the tornado simulator, and how they simulate whole tornadoes interacting with communities and things at Missouri S&T University, where she's a professor. And so I did get an opportunity to listen to that one, and just amazing fundamental research, but then with the focus of how do you change a community to make it more resilient. And then the science-based policy and community resilience in Mexico, that one was fascinating to me. They had decades. Their center had decades of data that they were ingesting and pushing back out to the public to help with resilience. And so it was quite clear the volume of effort that had gone into that at their center in Mexico, their federal through the federal government.
What type of data are we talking about? Just numerical data, or?
It was numerical data, but it was anything related to disasters and as well as any hazards themselves. So different hazards, certainly earthquakes down there, hurricanes, floods, anything that was needed to plan and mitigate.
Yeah. So were there any disagreements or challenges in questioning from the audience during these plenary sessions?
I don't recall any disagreements. I think at probably at the most was people tending to remind the audience that that the science isn't really, as much as we want it to, the science isn't really affecting policy as much as we'd like. And I know that's probably coming up later, but that was, I think that was something that popped up several times, and certainly when we were writing the resolution at the end.
Yeah. So, as well as the the plenary sessions of our keynotes, we also had 4 panel discussion sessions, and these were based upon the 4 priority areas of the Sendai framework. So was there anything that came out of those sessions that were
Um,
interesting?
yeah, definitely. I think, I would say, probably to me, I think probably some of the, probably the most significant to me, was the building back better. And I think that one, it was quite clear that, that everyone knows that, it's critical, following an event. And the best example I can think of is like the city of Los Angeles. This wasn't in part of this. I happen to know this from a colleague who led this effort. But they when a pipe breaks, they replace it with, seismic resistant, earthquake resistant pipe that they buy from out of Japan. And so that's sort of their mitigation. They don't replace them all because they couldn't do that. There's thousands of miles of pipeline, but they replace, each one that breaks. They replace a segment of 100 feet or however long, and so slowly, over a century, they'll have, a lot replaced, because of course the pipelines are sometimes 100 years old. And so they're making sure when something goes wrong, it's not a disaster, but something goes wrong, they're making sure they're spending a little bit more of it building back better. And so, um, I and then the investment itself in resilience. I wasn't able to attend that one, but I think probably the key there is really, um, how, I think it's the, benefit cost ratio. How do you make the argument that you should in fact build back better? And if you do that by just saying, okay, the tangible loss, is worth this much, it may not equate. But really, if you look at the impact to society, the impact to the people, the impact to the communities, then it's justifiable. The question is, how do you measure that? Which is sort of what I was talking about within Core and our center, is how do you measure the impact? And you can do that by looking at, economic models and the impact to the economy. But again, economists want to monetize things, and some things can't be monetized. And so I would say, if there's a way to really, show that with a new benefit cost ratio, and that would be the way to go.
Yeah. I mean, in the UK, we're having that exact debate about, in terms of, do we give up some of our land and some of the most vulnerable areas to the sea with rising sea level? And the answer is, in some of the most low-lying areas around Norfolk, is yes. But then the member communities are fighting back with legal challenges because they say, well, it's more than just money at stake here. It's our lives, it's our memories. And so this is very much where we need the stakeholder right down to the community level, because it's all well and good looking at just the big core numbers, but it's more than just that.
Yeah, definitely.
So one of the things about GADRI is at the end of every summit, it has a resolution. So this is like a document of what has been said, what we kind of agree upon in the room. And this year's resolution mentioned, participatory convergence and ethical data practices. What does that mean for GADRI going forward?
Yeah, so I think, well, of course, the participatory convergence is really, and the ethical data practices sort of merge, in the sense that, if you're bringing people, stakeholders in to participate in the research, and then as you're doing that, pulling in certain types of data. And so making sure that data is used in a way that, is intended to help them, that it's protected. Of course, we go through all sorts of, when we gather data, we go through all sorts of, training and human subjects training, even if it's not, it's not health data, but it's, just, data about families and things like that. And So for GADRI moving forward, I think, I can see that being, rather than just convergence approach to research, I could see participatory convergence being perhaps one of the sub themes directly in the summit in 2 years in Kyoto. And in fact, I would probably push that forward if anybody listened to me.
Yeah, and also when you say about ethical data practices, and this is something that is, being more widely discussed, and I don't know if it was discussed during the summit, but also the use of AI in data. And I don't know if that was being discussed in the room at the time as well.
Yeah, there was definitely some AI discussion, and I would say a couple of presentations in the fundamental research session that were using AI and different levels of it, but yeah, absolutely, that came up in the sense that when you're supplementing or you're filling in gaps, they're not necessarily real. How to use that, things like that. So there was some discussion. It wasn't a heavy discussion, but I think in 2 years, it wouldn't surprise me if the summit, has an AI focus. Not even sure, but it wouldn't surprise me at all.
I mean, I'm just thinking of the summit 2 years ago. There wasn't even one. I don't think no one was even talking about AI, letting alone using it. And now we are, what, it was literally what, 2 years and a few months later. It's now what is becoming one of the bigger things. So I agree with you. I think within it's less than 2 years, it will be pretty much be a big focus.
Yeah, I think so, and I think what we'll see is the probably a whole thread of research, or at least a breakout session on large language models and how they integrate into the research and things like that, because it's already happening, obviously.
Yeah. So the summit also called for better integration of indigenous knowledge, but how might that be formalized in future DRR strategies?
Um, let's see. With respect to DRR strategies, that one I would say, I'm not exactly sure how it would be formalized, but I would say that with participatory convergence, that certainly, if it's participation of indigenous peoples, then that's one way to approach it. But as far as how it would be formalized, I'm not sure on that exactly, other than mentioning that it needs to be integrated. So perhaps stating it would be the best option at this point, in my view.
There was an emphasis on nature-based solutions within the Building Back Better idea. Were there any concrete examples being discussed during the summit?
There, what I didn't hear. There was one that was discussed, but what I typically hear about are mangroves and things like that to stop erosion, to help with, and that's usually when we're talking about that and trying to model that. That's often the emphasis, but I think that there was I wasn't able to attend that particular session, but in the discussion that occurred in the plenary afterward, the next morning, I think it mainly was focused on not the concrete examples, but just making sure that we integrate those with, not by themselves, but also with other types of solutions. So in other words, they don't necessarily need to stand alone. But they can aid.
Yeah. So how will GADRI address the resolutions that data for DRR must be disaggregated, open source, accessible, usable, and used?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The how GADRI addresses it is, as an alliance, would be there was some discussion, could they develop and this was during a plenary discussion, maybe the resolution, if I recall, but is there some way to come up with sort of a global or a common format or something? And we didn't say this, but maybe it's sort of like the USB of data or something, um, so that was suggested, that would be one way to do it. How to make it used, that would make it usable and accessible. Open source, of course, one of the things that was discussed is the privacy issues and things like that, and the ethics that you asked about earlier. Ethical use, and because if it's open source, you can't always control, or you can't control who's using it. So, so some of those things are in conflict with one another, which is why it's a good but difficult question.
I mean, in my line of research, what I found was that most of the research is already being done. So I've come from a very much about looking at the psychology and the sociology of, climate perception and engagement. And what I found was that there are tons of data sets, but they're so fragmented everywhere that literally you don't know where they are. You literally haven't to spend hours upon hours looking for them. And then they're there, ready to be used, and they said they're all open access. You can use them for research, but no one does it. And it because they want to create their own data, because a lot of research is based upon creating data rather than compiling data. And I think that is something that maybe GADRI needs to look at as well, is that there are resources out there, and how do we, as you said, pull them together so that they are, usable? Because I have so many students who think when they're doing their master's dissertation, I've got to create new data. I'm like, you don't have to create the data. It's probably already there for you. You need to analyze the data. It'll save you a lot of time and money.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Actually, is and so a lot of it is the organization of the data, and it's disparate, and often not understanding, or there's not the proper metadata, things like that. And so while it exists, there can be improvements. Yeah, I agree completely.
Yeah. So the resolution highlights living labs and digital twins. How close are those to the mainstream, adoption?
I think researchers, and this is we didn't discuss this that much, maybe a little bit, but I think, and so this is maybe more my professional / personal view, but I think the true digital twins, they're being used for simpler things, components, machinery, things by mechanical engineers, aerospace engineers, things like that, and also in the some of the other industries. But I think from a disaster risk reduction standpoint, where we're talking about modeling an entire community, or a state, or a city, or a country, I don't think they're close. I think they need a lot of work to be a true digital twin. I think we do great, at community modeling, but it's really that automation of changing something and see how it interacts. There's not really automation to it at this stage. So I think I don't think we're close to mainstream adoption in DRR, but I think we want to be.
So now moving away from the resolution and actually just thinking about the summit, and what does the summit reveal about the current health of global disaster research, in particular with the policy interface, and with the challenges that we've been having in recent years with governments across the country, across the world.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I would say only a portion of policymakers listen and use the research. But it's also, it could also equally be an issue that as researchers, we're not communicating properly. We're not putting it in a format, or giving them something that they can understand and use. And so, when we say, research outcomes need to be, usable and useful, they may be useful, but they have to be usable, and that's the key. And so it's not. Now, that being said, if it's something that a government doesn't want to use because they don't like what the research shows, there's little that can be done about that from an ethics standpoint, other than it won't get used, and that's unfortunate. But so I think there's definitely a big gap still, in that we need to figure out how to communicate better, to lay that out. But government itself has a lot of challenges, as we know right now.
Mm. And I think the usable bit of how to communicate is arguably one of the hardest, as researchers. So I come back to my field again, and one of the things is it's literally about there's one term that it's got at the margin of it. I'm trying to think of the term it is now. It's in climate, probably it's like margin of error type thing. And one of the things is that, and I'm still trying to think of the word, but it's where the population think it might be wrong, but it's like it's probably not wrong. It's just that it's the margin of error is so small that it's not likely that it's going to happen. It's just that, is it 0.5 or 1.6? And that is a big difference when you're thinking of it. So I'm trying, and I can't for life of me think of what the word is off the top of my head.
I think I know. I sort of know your point, though. That like when we do we do climate work as well, and and climate adaptation research for physical infrastructure sometimes, and for communities, and with respect to that, people will sometimes say, "Oh, why are you using change in sea surface temperature? Shouldn't you be using the the technical terms?" And the argument is, well, nobody understands what that is. That comes from the atmospheric scientists, because but what it's doing is it's affecting the sea surface temperature. So that's what we're using, and it's not a perfect translation, but it gets the point across. And so we use that for that participatory or for that convergence research.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I'm trying to say, is that if you don't use the most simplest terms for the the non-specialist, you're not going to bring the community along. And if you don't bring the community along, you don't bring the government along with you. And that's so sometimes actually keeping it as simple and getting it down to the bottom up approach might help be more useful sometimes than trying to get government to try and bring the people along. So that's how I view it. Well, also, are we still talking to ourselves as researchers, or as stakeholder engagement generally now embedded? So this kind of moves on to it as well.
Yeah, I think I don't think we're talking to ourselves, but I think it's similar to the previous question. I think it's a communication issue. If we can communicate in a way that and all stakeholders understand in a different way depending on what type of stakeholder. So we discussed communicating with say government or policymakers one way, but then communicating with, say, if it's a homeowner or a business owner, there's certain things that they want to know. So I'd say it comes down to communication. Right now, I don't know that we're necessarily talking to ourselves, but we're definitely not talking to everybody.
Yeah. Where do you see the biggest gaps are, whether it be in hazard coverage, geographical representation, or methodological innovation?
I think hazard coverage we do okay on. I would say it's probably a combination. Let's see. Yeah, I would say the innovations themselves are really good. I think where the problem comes in that I see is really almost even a little more specific, is that and we're often asked for this too, is that it's really in the scaling and then losing accuracy. And so so when we look at something, we we look at something in detail, whether it's a community or something even smaller, and then somebody saying, "Oh, that's great, but in order for insurance, I need to model the whole state." And so the minute we move to state or we move to country, then somebody says, "Okay, well, I can do that with ML or AI," and start bringing these things in, and then of course the results won't mean as much. It'll give you results. It's sort of like when you write computer code as a student. Yeah, sometimes it spits out a result, but it's garbage. So that's something we have to be careful of. So I'd say those challenges are probably in the methodological innovation, in that we're still a lot of research is still a little bit too academic, and that's where the convergence research approach, and particularly the participatory convergence, come in.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking back to a conference I attended to about 2.5 years ago now, where I'm not going to say the researcher's name, but he basically said that we're doing the same presentation, the same research for 20, 30 years, and nothing has almost advanced, he felt. Do you think that's it? Would you agree with that, or do you think that is just not quite true?
I'd say not quite true. I think interestingly, that he chose 20 or 30 years because research does recycle after about 20 or 30 years, just like fashion or anything, and music, fashion, everything seems to have its cycle, and so we see it. But of course, then the methods themselves are much more advanced. So I'm using a different approach to solve it, and so then it's more accurate or it's better, or and then there's new research at the same time. I think there definitely are threads that are just being recycled and reproduced. But I would say, I think that's the nature of research. If you start with 100%, and if I'd say 10% of the research is doing 90% of the job for the world.
So the next thing was very much about, were there any tensions between high income country research priorities and those of lower income or more disaster prone nations?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So having been to GADRI, since I guess 2016, to the summit, I hadn't noticed that, and I definitely didn't notice it here. I think what I noticed was the lower income or developing nations, really inviting the other countries to engage and saying, we want to work with you in plenaries, and just stating it up front, and then having great side conversations. And so yeah, I didn't notice that at all. I noticed more of a almost collaborative approach to we're all in this together. Yeah, some have distinctly more of an advantage at adaptation and things because there's a higher income on average, and higher tax base. But I didn't notice any tensions. And of course I wasn't everywhere at every time, but I didn't see anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Given the call for intergenerational, equality and equity, how does GADRI ensure that youth leadership is more than just symbolic?
Yeah, so intergenerational equities difficult in the sense, like your question alludes to, in that, or states really that to have the more established are typically the ones leading an effort. And so for GADRI to ensure that, I think I would say it has to be through example, through things like making sure that it's not just the directors of the centers that are coming to GADRI, but make sure that there's some mechanism or mechanisms to give scholarships to junior researchers to come and let them lead sessions, let them lead panel discussions, because even as a brand newly minted PhD, they're an expert at what they do, and so give them a chance to engage would be my view.
Yeah, and I know that GADRI in the past have done that, and so I'm a recipient. Yeah, I'm a recipient of it in 2017 and 2021, 23,
Okay.
sorry. So I know that they have done that, and I think that GADRI very much have definitely done more than just being symbolic in that approach. And
Exactly, yeah. So I'd say continuing that, and then just making sure that I think as far as so that would make it more than symbolic, as far as making sure that that continues and occurs in their own country. That's perhaps difficult, other than laying out a program for people to present to a global audience online once in a while between summits, things like that, putting in programs.
yeah. How can GADRI guard against reinventing the wheel as noted in the resolution?
Um, Yeah, I think on that, from a research perspective, we've always sort of with our center prided ourselves in the very first meeting saying, okay, let's use everything that's out there and then build on it to hit the ground running. And so I think to guard against it, I think it would be making sure that you know which wheels are out there. And that's really, I think, the biggest thing. We see that with students all the time as professors. They're often, a student will, something, they'll write it up in great detail because it's new to them, but it's not new. And so it's sort of, I want to say it's wasted space. It's good to write it, but it's not something that's going to be published. And so I think doing the background work, doing the homework, knowing what wheels out there, what wheels, I guess, and then understanding that just because you can do something, for example, just because you can do something where there's a known perfectly accurate solution, just because you can do it with AI doesn't mean you need to.
Yeah, absolutely. So now just thinking about the summit itself. Which single moment or idea will stay with you long after the summit?
Um, yeah, I think for me the biggest one, I hadn't heard the term. We'd actually done it ourselves, not but it hadn't been formalized, the terminology. But I would say the idea would be that participatory convergence. I think it helps solve a lot of these issues of equity, of fairness, of it's sort of by bringing everybody together and giving them an equal, or as near an equal voice as you can at the research table. I think that can go a long way. And I think the moment would be, and I think we chatted about this earlier, but the moment would be, I think, just the closing reception or closing banquet, with the jazz band and just everybody. I think a few people had to leave early, but with about 50 to 60 people that were really enjoying themselves and sort of toasting to a successful summit. So for me, as serving as the host of the location, at least, that was that was the moment that I enjoyed, knowing that we had pulled it off, at least I thought, successfully.
And yeah, so now just thinking of all the work you've done, and with this, with all the work that GADRI's done in the past, how will these outcomes influence GADRI's work in the lead up to 2030, when the Sendai framework will be replaced, and beyond this into the new agreement?
Yeah, I think I think in a way, some of these approaches, like the convergence approach, probably wasn't being talked about a decade ago. as much. It was beginning. It was an idea, but it was very much in sort of its early research phases. With the National Science Foundation here, presumably in other countries, and so I think that converging, and I think we'll see a bigger focus on when you see the different items that are listed as priorities. I think what we'll see is a lot more multidisciplinary. Whether we'll see transdisciplinary and things, I don't know, but I think we'll see a lot of multidisciplinary concepts come in that will then require those things like a convergence approach to solve. And so I think that's where this can help lay the really lay that groundwork and say, look, this is state of the research. This is what's happening, and it can provide better, more effective, and faster solutions.
Yep. So my last two questions now. So how do you see the resolutions translating into tangible actions? What is the first on your list that needs to be done?
Let's see. I would say, probably first on the list. Yeah, probably. I think understanding the multiple levels of governance, to me, that seems critical. And then the data needs. I think the data need that we discussed 10 or 15 minutes ago, I think that's critical. But I think the biggest is that communication issue. Not just communication, but how do we get the science at least closer to policy? Like, how do we, and it's the, somehow syncing the research life cycle with the political life cycle. One is a couple of years and one is sometimes decades in the making. And so how do we do that and make research outcomes and investment in resilience, in disaster resilience? How do we make it, something that's that there's a political appetite for and that people can run on?
Absolutely. So lastly, looking ahead to the 8th GADRI Summit in Kyoto in March 2027, what do you hope will have changed or advanced by that point?
Probably the policy, I think, and I hope, I certainly, maybe not directly related to our summit, but I certainly hope the world settles down a bit, and gets back to where things were a few years ago, and then I definitely, I'm definitely hopeful that everyone will once again recognize that climate adaptation is needed to the changing climate. I think that's critical. And then perhaps the biggest advances, like we talked about, would be in AI. And so I can really see, participatory convergence, AI, and perhaps communicating, how to get science into policy better, as opposed to those three sub-themes.
Yeah. John, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Yeah, absolutely. It was great to talk with you, Ashley, and enjoyed the interview. Thank you.
Thanks.